We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
Good afternoon and welcome to the weekly edition of the Monday Mashup. It is only on Monday, so I suppose it is the weekly edition. This is Robert Phoenix, and I'm broadcasting to you live and direct from the heart of the great state of Texas, Central Texas, Austin, where so far I have not seen any sort of strange preparations or unusual roadside blockades that have been advertised as being taking place here throughout the month of August, but we're only still halfway through the month, so there is time. I have noticed an increased presence of police on the streets here more than ever. And when I say on the streets, I'm talking about cars, seeing sometimes 2, 3, 4 in a day, varying combinations. Here they have the state police, they have the local police, and they have the constables, constabulary, who are the sheriffs. And I've been seeing, a little more presence on the ground, especially last Friday. So nothing happening for now. We're about ready to enter into the back-to-school phase, and here it's the last week of summer. And children return to school essentially, I think, next Monday or Tuesday. So it'll be interesting to see if this coincides with some school drills as well, which would be, which in some ways would make sense if they wanted to do this as kind of a citywide event and include the schools as part of it. So I'll keep you posted if you're interested in finding out what's happening on this level and on this front with that. Interesting weekend, I suppose. Not necessarily on the news front, but on the sporting front, which does in some ways it does impact the news, or does impact our ability to kind of deal with the matrix as it is. And I'll get into it in just a moment. I wanted to say thanks again to Friday's guests, Matt Clark and Robert Bonomo, for coming on the show. If you haven't listened to the show, it's in the archives. I highly recommend it. Both men are really interesting. And looks like Robert will be joining me once a month for about a half an hour. Since he's in Russia, on the ground in Russia, I thought it would be great, and this came to me as a suggestion from my producer, to have Robert on as a sometime, fairly regular guest and just get updates from Russia. And so I asked Robert, and he's agreed to that. So it'll be pretty good. It'll be the last Friday of every month. And we'll spend 15, 20, 25 minutes talking about what's happening over there. We don't often get the straight scoop as far as our media goes. So it'll be good to see and good to hear Robert's perspective. So I urge you to go back and listen to Friday's show so you can get an understanding on what he is doing, what he's done, and where he's at, and also, of course, Matt Clark's work. Looking ahead for this Friday, I believe we'll be joined by the famous John Anthony West, along with James Swager, and they'll be doing their pieces independently on Friday's show, but they have actually worked together as late as last week, or at least they were in dialogue last week together. So we'll be getting into some hidden history, ancient history kinds of material with those two guys. With John, I think we'll be exploring the connections between Atlantis and Egypt. And I know that a lot of you out there listening are fellow former Atlanteans like myself, so it'd be kind of a homecoming of sorts in some ways, a remembrance theme of what once was and how we can bring back the glory days of Atlantis without all of the fascistic, dark, occultic, chimeric, black magical bullshit that we had to suffer through in those final days. It can all be much better again, can't it? So join us on Friday for John Anthony West and James Swager. Following Friday, I will have Cindy Dale on, and Cindy is she's an up-and-coming author, and she does a lot of work on healing and the subtle bodies and all that good stuff. And we'll get into that as deeply as we can within a 60-minute time frame. And we'll also see the return of one Courtney Brown. So it'll be Cindy Dale and Courtney Brown in 2 weeks on that Friday following this Friday. So some good stuff coming to you on the Friday Forecast. And then deeper out into September, I'll be doing a show with Radchick and Michael Edward. I've also been talking to John Trudell's people, and they want to do a full show with John and Radchick together, and John is into it. So I don't think I'm going to do it here, though. I'm going to start playing a little bit with Google Hangouts. And Google Hangouts basically allows you to have kind of a multiple online video chat interface that can stream live via YouTube. And I think it would be really appropriate and worthwhile to check that out with John and Radchick. So keep your eyes and ears open on that front. That'll be kind of a different event and a slightly, I guess, a special event in some ways. So we're gonna play with Google Hangouts, and we're gonna do some live streaming video. And then tomorrow, I've actually done the interview already, but Ben Emlyn Jones is a broadcaster and researcher in England. He interviewed me about 3 weeks ago, and the link to his show will be up tomorrow. And lastly, Darren Williams has delivered a just absolutely incredible piece on four major films that are in circulation: Iron Man, Star Trek. What else did he put in there? Oh man, I'm having a semi-senior moment. But he's really got Superman as another one of the films. He's really got into this pretty deeply, and has been making some very mind-blowing connections with these films. And he just delivered his piece over the weekend, and I'll be editing it and putting it up shortly. And I'll also be offering a PDF of that for download on the show when I have Darren on, and we're going to be talking together. That probably will be within the next 2 weeks, since we have this Friday booked up, and then the following Friday booked up as well. And then there's that bridge weekend between Courtney Brown and Cindy Dale and Michael Edward and Radchick. So we'll see if we can squeeze Darren in on that Friday. He's always really compelling radio, a two of clubs like myself. All right, so that's it. That's the housekeeping. Lots of great guests coming up and keeping you entertained and enlightened, because We need both during these times. We are living in a very strange universe, and it has the potential to get a lot stranger over the next few months. And we're going to get into kind of what we're staring down here, what everybody needs to be aware of, at least from a conscious perspective. Okay, now I'm not advocating that you prep, although I have in the past. If you look, even the federal government will tell you it's important for you to have, X amount of supplies and X amount of water, But they stop short of saying, hey, keep yourself up and running for at least 3 months. And I'm a firm believer that you need at least 3 months worth of supplies in your house. Bottom line, end of story. 3 months minimum. That means 3 months worth of water. Water is the most important. It is the most important thing that you can have during the times of crisis. You can go up to 30 days without food, but you can't go more than 3 days without water. So I urge everyone to either A, stock up on water, or B, have a really good water filter. And when I say filter, it means something in your sink that you can actually tap into and see if you can extract water that way, so you don't get crap water during very difficult times. And then the third would also be a portable water filter where you can actually go out into the wild or into nature and get water and use a filter right there to filter out any of the nasty stuff, viruses, bacteria, et cetera, et cetera. The Berkey filters apparently are quite good. I don't own one. I've done a lot of research on them. But you can bring the Berkey home and bring your water home and then filter through the Berkey. It's a little bit of a time-consuming process. But water is really important. And I'm going to tell you why it's important to have this stuff on hand. Because what you don't want is during a time of crisis to run out. And it's not that you would run out and then be at risk with sort of the vermin and the street criminals and the vandals, which will be out there, trust me, in a time of crisis. They will be out there. Whether they're real or not, they will be out there. It's not about risking your life or the life of your family in order to get supplies or stay stocked up. It's when you run out, who do you turn to? Who do you turn to if you run out? That's the big issue. And if you have to turn to, say, FEMA or DHS or whoever it is, then it becomes pretty tricky. You're putting yourself at risk. And we are a nation where we pride ourselves on being able to stand on our own 2 feet and being able to handle crises, on being self-sufficient and sovereign. This is part of our DNA in some ways. It's in the chart. It's in the U.S. chart. So being able to provide for yourself and your family during times of an ecological or monetary or military crisis in this country is paramount. So I suggest 3 months at minimum, and I think it's just good common sense. This is regardless of what I'm about to share with you, but it's just good common sense, period, end of story, okay? I'm not hyping fear. I'm not going to send you any websites. You can go out and buy rations or anything like that. It's just super important. Don't forget toilet paper. It's one of those things that during the time where people are dealing with rations or dealing with the lack of supplies and material, toilet paper is one of those things that is most often overlooked. If you're a woman, feminine napkins, feminine supplies, those are also quite important to have on hand. And just minor things like batteries, shoelaces, there you go, candles, very important stuff. Okay, let me talk about what happened over the weekend, and then we're going to jump into really kind of the headline of today's show. So I don't know if any of you are following Major League Baseball or sports at all, but the headline in this country right now doesn't seem to be anything related to anything that is political in nature or geopolitical in nature. Obviously, there's a lot going on with Egypt. We might even tap into that today. But the biggest story in the United States right now is Alex Rodriguez. And Alex Rodriguez plays for the New York Yankees. And there's a lot of really interesting subplots going on here that I think are actually beginning to look rather interesting on some level. Now, ultimately, it's a huge distraction. I mean, if you listen to sports talk radio, and I'm sure that this bleeds through into non-sports talk radio, you will hear the name Alex Rodriguez. You will hear about steroids. You will hear about all the things that allegedly occurred with him. In fact, even 60 Minutes just did a piece where they alleged that he outed his fellow baseball players in an attempt to misdirect Major League Baseball and their quest to ban him from the game for having a relationship with a company called Biogenesis, which was located out in Florida. Now, Biogenesis was a life extension or longevity center run by somebody by the name of Tony Bosch. And what he was actually doing was he was prescribing a number of performance-enhancing drugs, maskers, blockers, for professional athletes, mostly baseball players, but not solely baseball players. At least that's what I'm feeling, that he was tapping into the performance enhancement market across all levels of sports. Now, the whole concept of performance enhancing drugs for sports is absolutely fascinating, because we have this very strange and bizarre concept that our athletes should be pure, that there is this kind of sacrosanct temple of the body. Everybody has the same kind of natural God-given playing field in order to do well and to excel. And if you violate that on some level, you're violating God, or you're violating nature, you're violating this sacred trust amongst other athletes who have chosen not to do that to their bodies. But once somebody crosses that line or crosses that barrier and makes themselves more than who they are, then all of a sudden it becomes open game, that anybody can do it, or that anybody has the potential to do it. Now, it's against the law. I mean, steroids have become against the law. However, I have no doubt that many members in our local law enforcement are on steroid programs, bodybuilding, performance-enhancing programs. All you have to do is look at them. They're way bigger than they, theoretically should be. And steroids also create what's called a steroid rage. And I wouldn't be surprised if that kind of rage is connected to incidents where people are mistreated, or they get tased, or they get shot. I mean, I think that there is this switch that people that are on steroids just don't have the opportunity to turn on and off. If steroids not only affect the body, they affect the emotions, and they affect the psyche of the individual. But we're talking about here kind of a precursor or chemical precursor to the transhuman, because that's what steroids do. It's a technology. We are inserting the technology into our bodies in order to change them, modify them, make them different, make them stronger, give us faster reflexes, faster recovery time. Now, the steroids were developed by the Nazis. This all came out of World War II. And the people that were probably the most, I would say, egregious and aggressive when it came to steroid use were the Russians, and particularly the East Germans. And this was during the Cold War. And this was the way that they leveled the playing field with the United States in the quote-unquote free world. If you look at the swimmers from East Germany during the Olympics, the Munich Olympics, the Montreal Olympics, the 1980 Olympics were supposed to be in Moscow, and they were there, but we weren't. And then the 84 Olympics as well, which was in, Los Angeles, but I believe that the Russians and the East Germans did not participate. They held back. The East German women were built like men. So there was rampant steroid use going on during that time. And these were very crude steroids. They've gotten much more sophisticated over time. But that technology went pretty much system-wide after those three Olympics. And it eventually found its way into professional baseball and professional sports and professional cycling. Cycling, they were using methamphetamines in cycling in the Tour de France since the 1950s. So drugs were not an uncommon occurrence in the Tour de France, and everybody knew about it too. It was kind of an open secret that the best riders were doping. Now, it created some real problems for those riders. Some of them died young, some of them burnt out. You know, you were like tapping assets from the future by using methamphetamine over and over again in these bike races throughout Europe, and especially the Tour de France. But what's happened with steroids and what's happened with the steroidal athlete is that they've made a huge amounts of money for people that are associated with the sport, whatever sport it is. In cycling, obviously, it's Lance Armstrong. There are literally hundreds of millions of dollars made off of Lance Armstrong. It wouldn't be too far to say, or wouldn't be too far of a fetch to say that Lance Armstrong made close to $1 billion for people associated with his sport. And the same could be said for people like Jose Canseco and Mark McGuire and now Alex Rodriguez. And so what we have here is we have this really disingenuous sort of loop, this loop current between these athletes who have been enabled by their organizations or their leagues or whomever it is that they're performing under. They were enabled to do this. They were not necessarily given the green light, but they when it came down to these organizing bodies, they consistently looked the other way. It's like, we don't want to know about it. You're hitting tons of home runs. We're bringing people into the stands, and we'll deal with it later. And the same thing can be said for Lance Armstrong. Pro football has a huge problem, and it's the dirty steroid secret is in pro football. And there's no way that a man who is 6'3" or 6'4" at 325 pounds can run a 5 flat 40. It's just it's inconceivable. Inconceivable. In the 80s, athletes, for instance, the offensive tackle or defensive tackle probably averaged around 275 pounds. That's a lot of poundage or a lot of flesh on a human, 275 pounds. Now they're averaging about 325. And we don't make those kinds of radical evolutionary leaps over a short period of time. Now, what's happened with Alex Rodriguez, and this is where it gets interesting, he's taking up all this heat. I'm even talking about him on my show. He's taking up all this heat and all this atmosphere. It's a major distraction. But in some ways, it's becoming interesting because Alex Rodriguez is now fighting the system. Believe it or not, he's fighting the system. He's using all of his resources, and he has quite a bit. Trust me on this. The guy has a lot of money. He's made a huge amount of money with 2 massive contracts for his current team, 1, and the previous team, the Texas Rangers, 2. So Alex Rodriguez has a big war chest. He can hire lots of lawyers. And what happened is that the New York Yankees signed him to a very big contract, and they decided that they did not want him anymore, but he was taking up too much space. He was too costly, too much money. So in baseball, they can't just cut you outright. A contract is a contract. So what they did, and this is my theory, is that they worked with Bud Selig and Major League Baseball to go after Alex Rodriguez, and he had not failed a steroid test. And this is what gets really interesting. He had not failed a drug test. This is all based on evidence that they acquired through his former chemist, a.k.a. Tony Bosch, the biogenesis guy in Florida. So what we have here, and I'm going to bring this back to another athlete, which is Aaron Hernandez. What we have here in baseball is that this isn't even the federal government. The federal government is not going after Alex Rodriguez. In their minds, he did not do anything wrong. This is something that's happening inside of Major League Baseball. But what they're doing is they're compiling evidence, and they're putting a case together for suspending a person and literally ending his career. They want to suspend him for 211 games, which is an interesting number, 211. We get into the whole 11 sequence. But they want to suspend him for 211 games, which probably puts him into a null and void contract status with the New York Yankees. But all they have is they have a series of the receipts, communiques. This is all in some ways circumstantial evidence. What they don't have is they don't have a failed drug test. But here's what we're seeing. We're seeing that this is a model to try somebody in the court of public opinion and in an independent governing and legislative body, which is Major League Baseball. Now, as we see this, as it trickles down to you and I, what are we witnessing? We're witnessing the type of, I would say, evidentiary gerrymandering that could impact each and every one of us. That there is a type of information gathering that looks as if there has been a violation on some level, that the individual had broken some kind of law, some kind of 10A, some kind of regulation, ordinance, or whatever that is. But in reality, what's missing is the smoking gun. And the smoking gun is the failed steroid test. Now, they may be going after him for another, a variety of issues besides that we're not privy to. But I think that the main issue is that the New York Yankees have decided that they don't want his contract anymore, and that they're working with Major League Baseball to take him out. Now, everybody else that's associated with this whole steroid thing and these suspensions, they're all pretty much lesser players, although two of them are quite good. Johnny Peralta and Nelson Cruz. They've got 50-game suspensions. Johnny Peralta theoretically will be back at the end of the season for the playoffs for the Detroit Tigers. Another high-profile steroid user who's an incredible liar, Ryan Braun. He was suspended for 65 games, thus ending his season. He gets to come back next season, start fresh. All these guys got 50, 65 games. Alex Rodriguez got 211. Now, what's interesting about Rodriguez, and I'll talk more about Braun, what's interesting about Rodriguez is that he's decided to fight the system, and he has the resources to do it. So now, while all these other guys are out on their butts because they don't have his kind of money, his kinds of lawyers, his kind, and the incentive to fight, because it's just 50 games for them, it's 211 for him, and he makes $140,000 a game, which is ridiculous anyway. But he makes $140,000 a game. Do the math on that. He's got a lot invested in playing. So what he's done is he's decided to take on Major League Baseball. And there's he's going from a kind of this scumbag, liar, steroid user to somebody that's mildly interesting, because he is saying, no, that there is a conspiracy to remove him from the game. And he is going to fight it. He is not going to allow it. So it's going to be really interesting to see how Major League Baseball responds to all of this, because they're in for a dogfight with this guy. He's not going to give up, and he's playing right now, and he hit a home run last night. Again, high theater. They're playing the Boston Red Sox on national TV. He gets hit by a pitch. People are calling him cheater. And then he comes back later and he hits a home run. So I'm not saying that Alex Rodriguez is this political figure and great anti-hero. He's really not. But nobody in recent memory has taken on a major organization like Major League Baseball to the extent that he's doing now. And I think in some ways it's relevant. It's relevant because here's somebody who has a vested interest in their own economy pushing back on the powers that be in the sport that he's playing in. And some interesting things will no doubt be revealed over the next few weeks and few months as Rodriguez takes on Bud Selig, who's a buffoon, by the way, the commissioner of Major League Baseball. Now, Ryan Braun is an interesting case, and I may get into some trouble here when I talk about Ryan Braun. I may step on some toes. Ryan Braun was an MVP, and then after he won his MVP, he actually tested positive for elevated testosterone levels. And what he did is he blamed the guy who took his sample, blamed him. And in fact, he even got the guy fired. The guy lost his job because theoretically, Ryan Braun pointed out that he held the sample for too long, it was a tainted sample, and he was vehement about his own innocence. So much so that, like I said, the guy that took the sample, he's no longer working for that company. I don't even know if he's collecting pee for a living anymore. But he lost his job, and Ryan Braun vehemently came out and said, "Oh, I'm not a cheater." You know, he got up on his soapbox and rolled up his fist and shook it at the world, and he demanded that the world prove him wrong. You know, that his critics were out to get him, and he was on the offensive. Turns out he was a cheater. Turns out he was a liar. Turns out he did cause some real problems for people in the sport, especially people that trusted him. Best friend Aaron Rodgers went out on a limb to say that he believed in him. Now, Ryan Braun, and I apologize if I get ahead of myself, and I apologize if I step on some people's toes, but Ryan Braun happens to be Jewish, okay? Now, one of the things that he's saying now is that he is blaming anti-Semitic people for his fall from grace, which I think is really inappropriate. I mean, the guy is just, he created all this for himself, okay? All of it. He created just a shitstorm of lies and illusions, and then he has the nerve to come back and play the anti-Semitic card. It's just, it boggles the mind. So now even he's doing a 180, and he's going around the country now, and he's doing a mea culpa tour. I'm sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. Well, this is an issue. This is a real issue that we're dealing with in terms of sports, public opinion, our own personal right to put whatever we want into our bodies, okay? Whatever we want. We can remove a life from our body, but we don't have the right to put whatever we want in our bodies, whether it's medicinal marijuana, cannabis oil, freshly juiced cannabis leaves, to human growth hormone, whatever it is, we can't put it in our bodies. Theoretically, it's against the law. However, there are plenty of legal over-the-counter drugs with side effects so deadly and so damaging that they spend at least 15 to 20 seconds rattling through the side effects of any given drug at the end of their commercials on television. Yet we can put those in our bodies. We can put Vioxx in our bodies, which damages the hell out of the body. It's okay to take these drugs that have very few clinical tests, but have somehow been quickly rubber stamped and mandated as being safe by the FDA. What drug companies do is they put a couple $100 million in the war chest anytime they run out a new drug. If they have any issues with that drug, if they have any troubles with that drug, if people sue the company as a result of that drug and they lose, well, they've got the money set aside. They can pay out the claims. And if they pay out $200 million worth of claims and they've done $400 million worth of business, they've made a net of $200 million. And at the end of the day, that's a win for that company. And yet these drugs are allowed to be in the marketplace. Very little testing, very little oversight. But we can't put whatever we want into our body. If so, we're liable. It's against the law. It's a criminal act. Now, I'm not an advocate of steroids. I'm not saying that everybody should go out and use steroids, but I will say Major League Baseball was a lot more fun when they had them. And I think it's incredibly hypocritical that we live in this society where we pimp out almost every drug under the sun for every reason available and known to man, whether it's erectile dysfunction, acne, weight loss, high blood pressure, herpes, you name it, there's a drug for it. And there is a drug company more than ready to get it into your system. And to me, we live in a society that's saturated, absolutely saturated with drugs. And yet when it comes to the holy sanctified church of Major League Sports and athletics, suddenly it becomes a big no-no, a mortal sin. And that speaks to the hypocrisy of the place that we live in. which is why many people are nuts. Okay, let's shift the topic of conversation a little bit here, and let's move away from sports, and let's get into some real serious stuff. This was sent to me last night, and if you don't know about it, you need to. Now, this dovetails with the November timeline that I've been talking about astrologically and astronomically. Let's set the stage for you again. At the beginning of October, we will revisit the nasty square between Uranus and Pluto. And it seems like each time this square comes back, it gets more intense. Has anybody noticed that, or am I just kind of reading into it and projecting that it is? It feels like it's getting more intense. It feels like there's this kind of cumulative power or this cumulative energy that is generated every time this square comes into effect. And again, beginning of November, we're right back into that square between Uranus and Pluto. Talked about it on Friday's show, 9 degrees, 9 degrees. That's happening, number one. Number two, we have Mercury retrograde during that time in Scorpio. Keep that in mind. That's number two. Number three, what else do we have? We've got a solar eclipse. Again, at the beginning of November, it is what's called a hybrid eclipse, but we have a solar eclipse. And then the fourth piece of this would be more astronomical versus astrological is Comet Ison. And Comet Ison will be very close to the sun. I think it's perihelion to the sun at that point in time. So these are four major events all happening in the skies above us, and they are not events that bring happy hope and a smile to my heart. These are very intense, potentially deeply catalytic events and symbols in the skies above us. Now, keep that in mind. This is from a website. Thank you, Dari Murphy, for sending this my way. 12160. This is the name of the website, 12160.info. I wonder if that's the person's birth date, January 21st, 1960. This is by Frank Franklin II. Who names their kid Frank Franklin, by the way? Franklin II, which means there's a Franklin I. Wouldn't Frank Franklin II be Frank Franklin? He's a writer, whoever Frank Franklin is, for the Associated Press. And this is he's a photographer. He took the photo. The author here is Matthew Wald, New York Times. This is from the New York Times. This is not from the New York Post. This is not from some obscure websites. This was published 3 days ago. It says here, November 2013, America's power grid scheduled for nationwide drill. Let me read that again. November 2013, America's power grid scheduled for nationwide drill. The electric grid, as government and private experts describe it, is the glassjaw of American industry. If an adversary lands a knockout blow, they fear it could black out vast areas of the continent for weeks, interrupt supplies of water, gasoline, diesel fuel, and fresh food, shut down communications, and create disruptions of a scale that was only hinted at by Hurricane Sandy and the attacks of 9/11. This is why thousands of utility workers, business executives, National Guard officers, FBI anti-terrorism experts, and officials from government agencies in the United States, Canada, and Mexico are preparing for an emergency drill in November 2013 that will simulate physical attacks and cyber attacks that could take down large sections of the power grid. Let me just read you part of that again, okay? This is why thousands of utility workers, business executives, National Guard officers, FBI, anti-terrorism experts, and officials from government agencies in the United States, Canada, and Mexico are preparing for an emergency drill in 2013 that will simulate physical attacks and cyber attacks that could take down large sections of the power grid. Physical and cyber, okay? They will practice for a crisis unlike anything the real grid has ever seen. And more than 150 companies and organizations have signed up to participate. That's a lot. That's a lot. I wonder how much they're getting paid. They don't do this for free, I don't think. This is different from a hurricane that hits X, Y, and Z counties in the southeast, and they have a loss of power for 3 or 4 days, said the official in charge of the drill, Brian M. Harrell, of the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, also known as NERC. Who are these people? We really want to go beyond that. We've got this wet dream where everything goes down. Everybody is in the dark. And then the fun begins. That's what we want. And when the power comes back on, when the computers come back on, when the goods start flowing again, it's a very different world we'll be living in. One goal of the drill, called Grid X2, is to explore how governments would react as the loss of the grid crippled the supply chain for everyday necessities. If we fail at electricity, we're going to fail miserably. Kurt Hebert, a former chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, said at a recent conference held by the Bipartisan Policy Center. Mr. Harrell said that previous exercises were based on the expectation that electricity would be up and running relatively quickly after an attack. Now, he said, the goal is to educate the federal government on what their expectations should or shouldn't be. The industry held a smaller exercise 2 years ago in which 75 utilities, companies, and agencies participated, but this one will be vastly expanded and will be carried out in a more anxious mood. You mean to tell me people aren't in an anxious mood now? Most of the participants will join the exercise from their workplaces, with NERC in Washington announcing successive failures. One example, organizers say, is a substation break-in that officials initially think is an attempt to steal copper, but instead the intruder uses a USB drive to upload a virus into a computer network. The drill is part of a give and take in the past few years between the government and utilities that has exposed the difficulties of securing the electric system. The grid is essential for almost anything, but is mostly controlled by investor-owned companies or municipal or regional agencies. 99% of the military facilities rely on commercial power, according to the United States, according to the White House. The utilities play down their abilities in comparison with governments. They have the intelligence operation, the standing army, the three-letter agencies, said Scott Aronson, Senior Director of National Security Policy at Edison Electric Institute, the Trade Association of Investor-Owned Utilities. We have the grid operations expertise. That expertise involves running 5,800 major power plants, 450,000 miles of high-voltage transmission lines, monitored and controlled by a staggering mix of devices installed over decades. Some utilities use their own antique computer protocols and are probably safe from hacking, what the industry calls security through obscurity. Love these names. But others rely on Windows-based control systems that are common to many industries. Some of them run on in-house networks, but computer security experts say they are not confident that all the connections to the public internet have been discovered and secured. Many may be vulnerable to software known as malware that can disable the systems or destroy their ability to communicate, leaving their human operators blind about the positions of switches, the flows of current, and other critical parameters. Experts say a sophisticated hacker could also damage hard-to-replace equipment. In an effort to draw utilities and the government closer, the industry recently established the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council. made up of high-level executives to meet with federal officials. The first session is next month. Okay. This is scary. This could be the mother of all drills, okay? We're talking countrywide. We're talking going right into the power grid. We're talking people being unable to use the internet. That's a big deal because the internet runs on what? Power, theoretically. Now, your computer may be powered up. You may have a battery. You may have backup batteries. But I'll tell you right now, if you're on Comcast, how are you going to get on Comcast? Their power is going to be out for a period of time. Certainly the router or the connection to Comcast in your house will be out, unless, of course, you're able to somehow plug that in. But I don't think that that's going to be doable. So that means that people are not going to be able to communicate. What about cell phones? Are they going to be down too? Is your cell phone provider going to be down during that time? I mean, we're talking theoretically a nation in the dark for, it sounds like, an extended period of time. We're not talking an hour or two. This sounds like it could be 24, 48 hours before people are up and running again. And of course, it's happening during the month of Scorpio, and all of these very intense and deep and powerful and potentially transformational aspects that are happening at that time. Everything that I've talked about, I've been talking about this for months now, and here it is. Here's the event coming at us. Now, what can we do? Well, like I said earlier in the show, you can have some stuff on hand, but I think really what we want to do here now, right, is we want to talk about it. We want to bring it out into the light. We want to do what we do when we hear about these things, which is communicate, which is share, which is dial back the fear. We got to dial back the fear on it, because a lot of this is really going to amp people's fear way up. So we need to just look at it, talk about it, share it, become aware. You know, one of the things that we've learned, I think, whenever our friend Cliff High makes a prediction, that when he puts it out there in really dramatic fashion, that a lot of people are exposed to it. A lot of people's psyches are exposed to it. A lot of people are now tapping into that event, what I call the event canon. And we might actually begin to shift how that event occurs by bringing our unconscious awareness to the event before it happens. So this is what we have the opportunity to do now. We have the opportunity to view this in a conscious fashion and to see it in a way that allows us to be aware and not fearful of it. That we can be proactive, we can take some steps, and when the moment comes, hopefully we'll have some really solid protocols in place, knowing who your neighbors are, pooling together. Hey, what an idea, pooling resources together, talking to one another, staying close to one another. You know, we're in this polarity between Pluto and Scorpio, Pluto and Capricorn, and Jupiter and Cancer. And Jupiter and Cancer is all about the local. It's all about the expansion of the local. So I would say between now and November, know your neighbors, get to know them, talk. Say, hey, if anything ever went out in terms of power, how would we deal with it? Who's got generators? Who's got fuel? Who's got food? Who's got candles? Who's got whatever it needs for that moment in time? Maybe it's just your block. Maybe it's 5 houses, 4 houses on your right, 4 houses on your left, and the same across the street. Maybe that's it. But it's really important that we have these dialogues. Very, very important. So that's coming. There's another event coming as well. And this is happening in Pennsylvania, Washington, West Virginia, Virginia, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Delaware, and possibly Connecticut as well, Maryland for sure. This is happening in September, and I don't necessarily have the text in front of me, but let me see. For August. Hold on a second. Let me just dial this up here. Pennsylvania. Okay, here we go. Let me see if I can find this. This is from before it's news. We only have a few minutes left, but let me blow through this here. This is from before it's news. This is from Saturday, and Susan Duclos is the author, and I'll try to read this in the next 5 minutes. According to a notice sent by Senator Sheldon R. Songstad, retired of South Dakota State. So again, work with the sources, see if it's, vet the sources. Okay, vet the sources. So this is an emergency FEMA Region 3 alert. Region 3 includes D.C., Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia. It says the preparations listed include, preparations listed include a 9-week training course for UN peacekeepers in CONUS. What a name, CONUS. CON-US. I mean, what? Are they serious? Jesus, CONUS? To learn urban warfare, English and U.S. weapon systems beginning 4th week of July for 386,000 troops to be completed by August 1st. $11 million in antibiotics to be delivered to FEMA Region 3 by October 1st, ordered by CDC. FEMA purchase orders for over $14.2 million for MREs and heater meals to be delivered to Region 3 by October 1st. FEMA purchase orders for 22 million pouches of emergency water to be delivered to Region 3 by October 1st. FEMA purchase orders 13.6 million for MREs and heater meals to be delivered to Austin, thank you very much, by October 1st. That's wonderful. And 2,800 MRAPs must be delivered to DHS by October 1st. So let's get into this here as quickly as I can. We don't have much time left. It says here, a few nights ago, Donald Trump was with Greta on Fox News. He told her something big was going to happen, most likely starting the first week of October. He could say nothing else at this time. Here's what the Senator's National Preparedness Research turned up. I gave you all those numbers already. The 9-week training course. The World Health Organization held its second emergency meeting in its history to discuss MERS coronavirus, determined a vaccine must be put in place by October 1st. And we have all the MRAPs and all that stuff. No leave will be allowed for U.S. military from September 28th through November 5th. It gets us back to that November date, doesn't it? By NORCOM. NORCOM yearly training for civil unrest suspended until September 27th to be performed in northeast coastal areas. Date for release of QE3 report moved to October 16th. All DHS agents must qualify with sidearm, shotgun, and AR-15 by September 28th. No mention of yearly less lethal qualifications. Sporadic testing of GPS and communication satellites is coordinated for the first time with a testing date of September 29th. POTUS mandates to FEMA and DHS concerning support for metropolitan communities dealing with the extreme climate change must be complete by October 1st. These mandates were issued during the last 3 weeks. Over 300 school systems in the U.S. have determined they need 3-day kits for each school and 3-day kits for each student to take with them. Where the students will take them is a whole other matter. All deliveries are scheduled for the month of September. And I believe there's 500 school systems in the United States, if I'm not mistaken. So that's over half the school systems in the country. All National Guard units will complete riot control and disaster training during this year's annual 2-week training. All units must have their training complete by September 30th. Daily testing of the emergency broadcast system to begin on September 25th and run through October 2nd. Eastern-based Coast Guard units perform massive group training, usually performed in the Gulf, in Virginia and Delaware areas. This is a 10-day training mission to begin September 26th. And it says here, God, please help America. Sheldon R. Songstad, Senator, retired, South Dakota State. There's a lot going on, folks. There is a lot going on between this and testing the power grid in November, there seems to be a massive amount of activity that is being concentrated in almost in a funnel effect towards October and November. So we are talking about it. That's what we're doing. We're talking about it. We're bringing this to light. So I don't know exactly where it's headed. Got a few days, a few weeks to begin to determine or discern where all this is going, if it's going anywhere. But I'm telling you, there is something afoot, and November really seems to be the day. It is the day. Or at least it's the month. I'm trying to think if I can leave you with a good story before we end the show today. I'm not sure I necessarily can. But sometimes life doesn't end with good stories. And that's the way it is. Sometimes we're left with more questions than answers. And sometimes we're left with our own anxiety and our own fear and our own inability to make sense of the world around us. And when that occurs, then we have to tap into our higher power. We have to tap into the sacred dimension and the love that is eternal. You have to tap into faith in a way that, it's a real exercise. And faith is not a drill. That's all it is. Faith is not a drill. All right. So in that case, keep the faith, keep the love, use your head to discern what's real, and your heart to step when it's possible. This is Robert Phoenix. You've been listening to the Monday Mashup. I'll be back on Wednesday with Navigating the Astrological Matrix. And take care of yourselves. I'll see you then. Bye.
We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.